The rain drummed against the windshield as Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale in the faint glow of the dashboard lights. The winding road snaked through dense woods, their towering silhouettes bending under the weight of the storm. He squinted through the torrents, spotting the faint glimmer of a gas station sign ahead. Finally pulling in, he killed the engine and stepped out, the cold rain instantly soaking through his jacket. Inside, the gas station reeked of damp wood and stale coffee. An old man stood behind the counter, peering at Ethan with an intensity that made him pause. "You headed to Harrow Creek?" the man asked, his voice a gravelly drawl. Ethan nodded, shaking the rain from his hair. "Got a cabin there. Research project." The old man snorted, his gaze flicking to the window where the dark woods loomed. "Research, huh? You one of them science folks?" Ethan forced a smile, reaching for a cup of coffee. "Something like that." The man leaned closer. "Just don't go wandering too deep into those woods. People talk about strange things out there. Lights, sounds. Folk who go in sometimes don't come back." Ethan chuckled nervously, brushing it off as small-town superstition. But as he stepped back into the storm and continued down the road, the old man's words lingered. By the time the cabin came into view, a modest structure nestled at the forest's edge. The rain had lightened. Ethan parked, hauling his gear inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and neglect, but it would do. Unpacking his equipment, he set up his temporary lab in the corner. A few sample containers, a microscope, and a notebook were all he needed for now. His grant proposal hinged on this trip, the promise of discovering a rare bioluminescent plant species rumored to exist only in this remote area. If he could confirm its properties, it might revolutionize medical imaging or even renewable energy. Night fell quickly, the storm clouds swallowing the last slivers of daylight. Ethan lit a lantern and sat at the desk, poring over old field notes and maps. The woods outside were silent, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling the window. Just as he was beginning to lose himself in the rhythm of planning, a faint glow caught his eye through the trees. He froze. The light wasn't natural, not the warm flicker of a fire or the cold beam of a flashlight. It was an otherworldly shimmer, faint but steady, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Grabbing his jacket and flashlight, Ethan stepped into the night. The air was damp and cool, the scent of pine and earth sharp in his nose. The glow grew brighter as he ventured deeper, weaving between the trunks. The underbrush seemed almost alive, the leaves and branches brushing against him as if trying to hold him back. Then he saw a cluster of plants, their leaves glowing with a pale, silvery light. They were unlike anything he'd seen before, their stems twisting in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost purposeful. Kneeling, Ethan gently plucked a small leaf and placed it in a sample container. The glow dimmed the moment it was separated from the plant, but a faint shimmer remained. As he stood, a low rustling sound behind him made him turn sharply. The beam of his flashlight swept over the trees, but nothing moved. Shaking off the unease, he made his way back to the cabin. Inside, he wasted no time examining the sample under his microscope. What he saw made his breath catch. The cell seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive in a way that defied explanation. Ethan scribbled notes furiously, his earlier apprehension forgotten in the thrill of discovery. Hours passed unnoticed until a soft knock at the door startled him. He froze, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Who could be out here at this hour, opening the door? He found a young woman standing on the porch, her auburn hair damp from the rain. She looked hesitant, almost shy, but her eyes held a quiet intensity. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm Mia. I work at the diner in town. I saw your car earlier and figured you might need some supplies. The store's usually closed this late, but I thought I'd check." Ethan blinked, surprised. "That's thoughtful. Thanks, but I'm good for now." Maya hesitated, her gaze flicking past him to the faint glow of his equipment inside. "You're not from around here. Just here for a research project," he said, suddenly wary. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something fear. Curiosity crossing her face. "Be careful," she said finally. "This place, it's not like anywhere else." Before he could ask what she meant, she turned and disappeared into the night. Ethan shut the door, her words gnawing at the edge of his thoughts. Something about the way she'd said it unsettled him. Back at his desk, he noticed something strange. The sample, which had been glowing faintly, now flickered erratically. As he watched, the glow seemed to form shapes, patterns that dissolved before he could make sense of them. He leaned closer, his pulse quickening. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. The air grew heavy, a palpable tension pressing down on him. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers, faint and indistinct, coming from the sample. He backed away, heart pounding, and the lights returned to normal. Whatever he brought back from the woods, it wasn't just a plant. It was something more, something that defied every rule of biology he knew. And he had a feeling the forest wasn't done with him yet. Ethan woke early, the memory of the glowing patterns from the night before still sharp in his mind. He spent the morning poring over his notes and running preliminary tests, but the results made no sense. The sample's cellular structure wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. It seemed to respond to external stimuli, faintly pulsing when exposed to sound or light. It was almost as if the plant was aware. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but curiosity won over caution. He decided to head into town for supplies, both to expand his experiments and to learn more about the area. The diner was already buzzing with morning chatter when he stepped inside. Maya stood behind the counter, serving coffee with practiced ease. Her eyes met his briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them before she moved to another table. As he waited for his order, a man slid into the booth across from him without invitation. Stocky and exuding a quiet confidence, the man extended a hand. "Lucas Grant," he introduced. "Heard there was a new face in town. People here don't get a lot of visitors, so you've caused quite the stir." Ethan shook his hand, wary. "Ethan, just here for research." Lucas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Research? Huh? You wouldn't be poking around the woods, would you?" "Locals are a bit sensitive about that place." Ethan kept his tone casual. "Just following leads on some unique flora. Nothing major." Lucas leaned back, studying him with a predatory gleam. "Well, if you find anything interesting, let me know. I've got a vested interest in what that forest has to offer." Before Ethan could respond, Maya appeared with his coffee, her tone sharper than he'd heard it before. "Lucas, don't you have somewhere else to be?" Lucas chuckled, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Always a pleasure, Mia. Nice to meet you, Ethan." As Lucas left, Ethan frowned. "What's his deal?" Maya hesitated, glancing toward the door. "He's trouble. Owns half the town and he's been trying to buy the rest." "Stay out of his way." Ethan nodded but filed the interaction away. He had a feeling Lucas wasn't the type to let things go. Later, as he loaded his supplies into his truck, Maya caught him by the arm. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. "Not here." They met that evening at the edge of the woods. Maya looked more serious than Ethan had ever seen her. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said. "That forest isn't safe." Ethan crossed his arms. "I'm a scientist, Maya. I deal in facts, not ghost stories." "This isn't a story," she snapped. "My father went into those woods 5 years ago. He never came back. I've heard the whispers at night. Seen lights that don't belong to anything natural. People disappear out there." Her voice softened. "Whatever you're looking for, you need to ask yourself if it's worth the risk." Ethan hesitated, the weight of her words clashing with his determination. "I found something, Mia. Something incredible. If it's what I think it is, it could change everything." She shook her head. "It's not just a plant, Ethan. That place. It's alive." Before he could press her further, a faint rustling came from the trees. They both turned, but there was nothing there. The unease between them was palpable as they parted ways, Maya disappearing into the shadows of the town while Ethan returned to his cabin. That night, he dreamed of the forest. Twisting trees and glowing shapes danced behind his closed eyes, whispers brushing the edges of his consciousness. When he woke, he felt drained, as if the forest had reached into his mind while he slept. Determined to push forward, Ethan set up a more advanced experiment. He exposed the sample to varying frequencies of sound, watching as the patterns of its glow shifted. It was responding, but not randomly. It was forming sequences, patterns he began to suspect were some kind of rudimentary communication, Before he could analyze further, a knock on the door startled him. This time, it wasn't Mia. Two men in dark clothing stood on his porch, their expressions impassive. "Mr. Grant would like a word," one of them said. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he masked his nerves with a calm veneer. "I'm busy." The man stepped closer, his shadow falling over the threshold. "Mr. Grant isn't used to waiting." Realizing he had no choice, Ethan followed them to a sleek black car parked on the dirt road. The ride was silent, tension thick in the air. They pulled up to a large estate on the outskirts of town, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. Inside, Lucas waited in a plush sitting room, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Ethan," he greeted warmly. "Glad you could make it." Ethan didn't sit. "What do you want?" Lucas swirled his drink, his smile predatory. "Straight to the point." "I like that. I want to help you. Whatever you found out there, it's bigger than you realize, but you're out of your depth. I have the resources to take this further than you ever could." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not interested." Lucas's expression hardened. "Don't be naive. You think you're the first person to stumble on something out there? That forest has secrets people would kill for. You can either work with me, or you can find out what happens when you get in my way." Ethan didn't respond. He walked out, every nerve in his body screaming at him to leave town, to abandon the research. But he couldn't. Whatever was in that forest, it was calling to him. Back at the cabin, Ethan noticed something odd. The sample, which had been stable earlier, now glowed faintly in the same pulsing patterns he'd seen in the forest. As he watched, the pulsing quickened, almost as if it were responding to his thoughts. And then, faintly, he heard it again, the whispers. This time, they were clearer, though still incomprehensible. A chill ran through him. He wasn't sure if he was on the brink of a breakthrough or a nightmare. Somewhere deep in the forest, he knew, the answers waited. But so did the dangers Maya had warned him about. And as much as he tried to focus on the science, a growing part of him feared that this discovery might demand more from him than he was willing to give. Ethan stood at the edge of the forest, the faint light of dawn filtering through the mist. His equipment was packed tightly in his backpack, but the weight on his shoulders wasn't just physical. Maya's warnings and Lucas's threats lingered in his mind, warring with his determination to uncover the truth. The forest seemed different this morning, quieter, as though it was waiting for him. Maya arrived, her expression grim but resolute. She carried a flashlight and a worn notebook, the edges of its pages curling with age. "If you're going back in there," she said, "I'm coming with you." Ethan hesitated, but there was no point arguing. They both had something at stake now, and Maya's knowledge of the area might prove invaluable. Together, they stepped into the woods, the trees closing around them like a shroud. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. As they moved deeper, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the environment. The air seemed thicker, heavier. The plants grew denser, their shapes more alien the farther they went. The glow of the bioluminescent flora was faint but constant, guiding their path like an unspoken invitation. They reached a clearing where the ground was carpeted with luminous moss. Ethan crouched, taking a sample, but Maya's attention was drawn to something else. Her eyes widened as she pointed to a massive tree at the edge of the clearing. Its bark was gnarled and twisted, and carved into its surface were symbols intricate, unfamiliar, and pulsating faintly with the same glow as the plants. "It's like it's alive," she whispered. Ethan ran his fingers over the carvings, feeling a faint vibration. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this the source of the energy he detected in the samples? Before he could analyze further, a low hum filled the air, rising in intensity. The glow from the tree brightened, and the ground beneath them trembled. "Ethan, we need to go," Maya urged, pulling at his arm, but Ethan didn't move. His curiosity had taken over, his scientific instincts overriding his fear. He reached for the tree again, but as his fingers brushed the bark, an electric jolt shot through him, and his vision went white. When he came to, Maya was kneeling over him, her face pale with worry. "You blacked out," she said. "We need to leave." Now, Ethan struggled to his feet, his head pounding, but something was different. The whispers he'd heard before were louder now, clearer. They weren't just sounds, they were words, fragments of a language he couldn't fully understand, but felt in his core. They made their way back to the cabin in silence, the tension between them palpable. Once inside, Ethan set to work immediately, analyzing the new samples and documenting the symbols from the tree. The patterns were unlike anything he'd seen, but they resonated with the sequences he'd observed in the plant's cellular structure. Mia watched him, her arms crossed. "You're obsessed," she said finally. "You're not even thinking about what this could mean." Ethan looked up, his eyes blazing with a mix of excitement and frustration. "This is a breakthrough, Maya. Don't you see? That forest isn't just a habitat, it's an ecosystem with intelligence." "It's communicating with you?" she asked, her tone skeptical but tinged with fear. Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest wanted something from him. Before he could dwell on it, the cabin lights flickered. A shadow passed by the window, followed by the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Ethan and Maya froze, exchanging a tense glance. A moment later, the door burst open, and Lucas strode in, flanked by two of his men. "Nice setup," Lucas said, his eyes scanning the room. "I thought I'd stop by and see how your research is coming along." Ethan stepped in front of Maya, his jaw tightening. "Get out," Lucas smirked. "Not until I get what I came for. You've been busy, haven't you? Those samples, those symbols, they're worth a fortune. You're wasting them in this shack. I'm not selling anything to you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath it. Lucas's smile faded. "That's unfortunate." He gestured to his men who began rummaging through Ethan's equipment. Maya moved to stop them, but one of the men shoved her back. Ethan's fists clenched, but Lucas raised a hand, stopping him. "Easy," Lucas said. "No need to make this messy. Just give me what I want and we can all go our separate ways." Ethan glared at him, but before he could respond, the hum started again. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, filling the room with an otherworldly resonance. The samples on the desk began to glow, their light pulsating in sync with the sound. Lucas took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell is that?" Ethan didn't answer. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and the glow intensified. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw shapes forming in the light figures' faces watching them. Then the lights went out. In the darkness, chaos erupted. Lucas shouted orders, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the hum. Ethan felt a hand grab his arm, and he turned to see Maya, her face illuminated by the glow from the samples. "We have to get out of here," she said. They stumbled out into the night, the forest looming around them. Behind them, the cabin shuddered, as if the earth itself was rebelling. Lucas's men scrambled out, their faces pale with terror, but Lucas remained inside, shouting defiantly. The hum reached a crescendo, and then there was silence. The cabin was gone, replaced by a smoldering crater. Ethan stared at the spot, his mind reeling. Whatever power the forest held, it had made its move, and it wasn't done yet. Maya grabbed his hand, pulling him away. "This isn't over," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. The forest had shown its strength, but it had also revealed something else. It was alive, and it had a purpose. Now, more than ever, he was determined to understand it. Ethan stared at the crater where his cabin had stood hours before. The faint glow from the forest still danced along the edges of the clearing, as if taunting him. The hum was gone, but the echoes of its resonance lingered in his chest. Maya stood beside him, her breath visible in the cold night air, her eyes fixed on the ruins. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "The forest did this." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. It wasn't just a reaction to Lucas's intrusion. The destruction felt deliberate, targeted, as if the forest had issued a warning or an ultimatum. He thought of the whispers he'd been hearing, growing louder and clearer. They weren't just fragments of sound anymore. They were thoughts, ideas pushing their way into his consciousness. "We need to go back in," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. Maya turned to him, incredulous. Are you insane? The forest just destroyed your cabin. Lucas is gone. You're lucky to still be alive. It's trying to communicate. Ethan insisted. I can hear it. It wants something. What if it wants us dead? Maya's voice rose, her fear barely concealed. Ethan, my father I know. Ethan cut her off, softer now. But it didn't kill me. Whatever happened at the tree, it connected with me. I can't explain it, but I think I can reach it. I think I can stop this. Maya stared at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. When she found none, she exhaled sharply. Fine, but we do this my way. No more running in blind. By the time the sun rose, they had a plan. Maya led the way, navigating the dense undergrowth with a precision born from years of familiarity. Ethan followed, his backpack lighter now just essentials and the few samples he'd salvaged before the cabin was destroyed. The deeper they went, the more alien the forest became. The trees seemed to shift, their branches twisting into shapes that defied logic. The glow from the bioluminescent plants intensified, casting eerie shadows that danced like living things. Hours passed before they reached the clearing again. The massive tree loomed ahead, its carvings pulsating with a faint, rhythmic glow. Ethan felt the same pull as before, but this time he approached with caution. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. He knelt by the tree, his fingers tracing the symbols. "What are you doing?" Maya whispered, her voice tight. Ethan didn't answer. He closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of the whispers. Slowly, he began to hum, matching the frequency he'd observed in the plant's cellular pattern. The glow from the tree brightened, and the ground beneath them trembled. Maya grabbed his arm. Ethan, but he wasn't listening. The whispers coalesced into a single, clear voice, deep and resonant, vibrating in his skull. It wasn't speaking in words he knew, but somehow he understood. Balance, preserve, resist. The images came next, flooding his mind in rapid succession. A thriving forest, untouched and teeming with life. Then the same forest scarred by machines, the glow of its plants fading. A figure stood at the center of the destruction, Lucas, his hands outstretched, clutching something that pulsed with light. Ethan saw himself too, standing at a crossroads, the weight of a choice pressing down on him. The voice spoke again, this time with unmistakable urgency. "You must restore," Ethan gasped as the connection broke, his body trembling. Maya steadied him, her face pale. "What happened?" "It showed me. Everything," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "The forest isn't just alive. It's a guardian. Lucas was trying to take something from it, something vital. If he succeeds, it'll destroy the balance." Maya's grip tightened. "Lucas is gone. The forest took care of him." Ethan shook his head. "No, he's still out there. And if he finds what he's looking for, it's over." They didn't have to wait long to confirm his fears. As they made their way back toward the edge of the forest, they stumbled upon a clearing littered with debris, pieces of advanced equipment shattered and smoking. Lucas's men were gone, their absence as chilling as their presence would have been. But Lucas himself stood at the center, unharmed, holding a glowing shard of something that pulsed with an unnatural light. He turned as they approached, a smile spreading across his face. "Ethan, I was wondering when you'd show up." "What are you doing?" Ethan demanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Finishing what I started," Lucas said. He held up the shard, its glow casting strange shadows across his face. "This is the core, isn't it? The heart of the forest? And now, it's mine." "You don't understand," Ethan said, stepping forward. "If you take that, you'll destroy everything. The forest, the balance, it won't survive." Lucas laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Balance? This place has been hiding its power for too long. Think of what we can do with this. Energy, medicine, wealth beyond imagination. You're a scientist, Ethan. You should understand the potential." "I understand the consequences," Ethan shot back. "That thing isn't just power, it's life. Without it, the forest will die and it'll take everything with it." Lucas's smile faltered, but his grip on the shard tightened. "You're too late to stop me." The hum began again, louder than ever. The ground shook violently, and the glow from the shard pulsed in time with the tremors. Ethan glanced at Maya, then back at Lucas. He had one chance. Before Lucas could react, Ethan lunged. His hand closed around the shard, and the hum reached a deafening crescendo. Pain shot through him, but he held on, his mind flooded with the forest's voice. Restore. The shard's glow intensified, and Ethan felt it pulling him in, merging with him. The pain was unbearable, but he didn't let go. Images of the forest flashed before his eyes, its life, its struggles, its resilience. He felt its anger, its fear, and its hope. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The hum faded and the shard disintegrated into dust. Lucas staggered back, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" he shouted. Ethan didn't answer. The forest was quiet now, its balance restored. Lucas turned and fled, disappearing into the trees, but Ethan knew he wouldn't get far. The forest would see to that. Maya helped Ethan to his feet, her expression a mix of relief and awe. "Is it over?" Ethan looked around, the forest's glow softer now, almost peaceful. For now, they left the forest together, the whispers finally silent. As they reached the edge of the trees, Ethan glanced back one last time. He didn't need the forest to speak to know what it was telling him. The balance was fragile, and it was up to him to protect it. And somehow, he knew this was only the beginning.